Here with Brandon Agamennone, MLB scout for the Red Sox for a while, founder, president of ProSource Athletics, pitched professionally for the Expos, was standout pitcher at Maryland, but author of the book Baseball Prodigy and also the app now. So, Brandon, thanks for jumping on with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Is it weird for you seeing Maryland in the Big Ten?
It is. It's very weird because, I grew up in the ACC days. And so we're down in Duke and Wake Forest and NC and all that. But, when they made that transition, I felt like it was a positive one for the program overall because, now you're also not competing against those guys anymore for the recruiting pieces, and so I felt like they were able to get some really good players in, and I know Swope and Johnny Poss really well, and those guys have done a phenomenal job over the years with the program, and they're continuing to pour into it. But yeah, it's definitely a little weird.
Where was Coach Swope's timeline at Maryland around your timeline?
He was a year after me. So I got drafted as a senior, 98. And I think he came in the class of 99, if I remember correctly. And then, obviously had a phenomenal career there. And he got drafted by the Expos. And so we saw each other in pro ball and spring training, stuff like that. We're just at different levels at the time. But, man, he is a baseball lifer. He has done phenomenal passion for the game. The way he teaches, his care for the athletes, it's off the charts.
Yeah, he's got some outside-the-box stuff coming down with the motor preferences stuff. It's some outside-the-box stuff that's going to be interesting to see what shakes out with that in the next 5-6 years with everything that he's doing.
Yep, no doubt.
And then we talked about Jamie Carroll. That's our common bond. I think I was in Harrisburg at PA one of those summers when I was coaching in the Cape going back and forth. So I think around that time I was hanging out with you guys going back and forth in the Cape, and just I think that's some of the common bonds that you get out of the baseball community is people that you've played with or you've been around, because the community's so small, so it's a tight community.
It is. Jamie was we talked about his story and that phenomenal path, and it was kind of this roller coaster of emotions watching him go through, because from a teammate perspective, one, he's just an incredible human being, as you know. And then the second part of that is, you could see the success. You could see, like, he could play multiple positions. He was so versatile. I think even in one game in AAA, he might have played all 9 positions, except pitcher, so maybe 8 as just kind of a thing. And he did really well, and we're like, what in the world? And then when he got called up, I couldn't have been happier for anyone else, and he's had an outstanding career. Now he's passing on to, college players, high school players. It's just, that's what he does.
Was there ever a concern for you all that the Expos were just going to completely go away?
Yes. Yes, there was. It was a weird dynamic because, I think any athlete that they were the team that drafted me, and I was there for 6 seasons and had, known everybody coming up, all the coaching staff, all the front office, everything like that. And so you become tied to that organization emotionally, and you want to see them have success, and you want to see them really do some things. And at the big league level, when you're talking about Vladimir Guerrero and Jose Vidro and, Javi Vasquez and, Brad Wilkerson and on, right? Like, you just go, man, there's some studs. And then all of a sudden we were like, are we going to go down to whatever it was at the time, 28 teams in the big leagues, and Expos are going away? What do we do? And there was talk in the clubhouse in the off season when all this was swirling. Are they going to do like a draft of us guys? Are we going to disband and I'm going to go to the Athletics and you're going to go to the Pirates? And you're going to, there was talk about that. So there was certainly concern around it.
Well, you even go back before that, Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez, Andre Dawson, Tim Raines.
Right.
You look at the Expos, the history of that organization was unbelievable with their drafts and their player development people.
And you hit the nail on the head there. Player development was outstanding. So it's kind of a funny story. I was sitting in University of Maryland, I remember it clear as day, and we were headed towards a draft. And my best friend said, hey, who would you not want to get drafted by? And I was like, Expos, right? And there was no rhyme or reason to it. It's just I didn't have a lot of history with them. And, growing up outside of Annapolis, Maryland, you just kind of think, well, Orioles. And I grew up a Red Sox fan. So I was like, Red Sox. And then I get drafted by them, and I couldn't be more thankful. I mean, their lineage, their legacy as far as player development was just top notch. I mean, the guys that they brought in, and if you think about some of their player development, guys that went on to be big league pitching coaches, big league managers, different things like that. Brent Strom, who's obviously had a huge impact on the pitching community. And I saw him actually last year at the World Series with the Diamondbacks. And you just think, wow, like that's who I got taught by. I mean, it was incredible. So they did a good job.
Did you play with Milton Bradley?
I did.
That was that championship. That's Jamie's favorite story, by the way, about Milton Bradley in the championship series.
So I'm sure he's shared that with you, but if I might take a minute and share that whole thing. So,
because I know most people don't know this story, and it's a great story.
Oh, it's insane. So it's hands down one of the best baseball stories I've ever been a part of. So we just make the playoffs. We're in AA in Harrisburg, and we've got, I mean, we're loaded. As like looking back, we had a really good staff. I mean, you had Jake Westbrook and Tony Armas Jr. and guys like that along the way. And then on the offensive side is Wilkerson and Milton Bradley and JC and just, I mean, you're like Brian Schneider, catcher. So we're going up against the Yankees in Norwich at the time. Well, this is September. It's starting to cool off, Northeast. Rainy, all this other stuff. Well, then a hurricane comes up the East Coast. And so we're playing these best of 5 series, and we get, I think it was 3 days rained out, and we're just sitting in hotels trying to go underground tunnels to hit, throw bullpens, all this other stuff. And at that point, we're in past mid-September. We're just like, uncle, like, let's go home. But we also wanted to win, the competitive spirit and all that type of stuff. So finally, we tie up the series, and we're feeling pretty good about it. I had pitched in relief the night before, like, I don't know, maybe it was like 4 1/3 or 4 2/3 innings. So I was done. So I'm just spectator at this point. And they come out in game 5, and they just jump all over us. And they're up like 6 runs, and we're like, oh, man, all this way. It's this light rain still coming down, all this other stuff. And so we get into the bottom of the 9th, we're home team at Harrisburg. And I think, if I remember correctly, they had a lefty on the mound. We had 3 lefties coming up, which was Wilkie, a guy named John Tucker, and Andy Tracy, who also spent some time in the big leagues. And it's like bloop single, CNI ground ball, whatever it is. And we're down by 4. Yeah, we're down by 4 going into the bottom of the 9th. And so we got bases loaded, nobody out. And then they bring in a guy named Joe Liscio, who was absolute nails closer that year. I think he led the league, all this other stuff. Everybody expected him to be, whoever, the next superstar at the big leagues. And he proceeded to come in and just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now we're down to, 2 outs, nobody on. And we get a guy, Jason Camilli, comes up to hit. And he hits this little, kind of in between 5-hole between third and short, and the guy makes a play, but something happens and he can't make the play at second base. So we still have 2 outs, everybody's safe. We score a run, now we're down by 3. Milton comes up, and he's batting left-handed, he's a switch hitter, batting left-handed. And I mean, this guy's just like ... 0-2. We're like, oh man, oh no. And now the rain's really starting to come down, and it's cold, and you're just like, all this way for this, really? Well, he works a count to 3-2, and on the 3-2 pitch, the one that was 2-2 to 3-2, we were like, that may have been a strike. I mean, it was so close. But Milton's eye was phenomenal, right? And so then 3-2, and we're just sitting there, and all of a sudden, next pitch, and wham, grand slam, walk off. I mean, the place goes insane. The radio broadcaster swears over top, because he's like, holy, over top of the, and we're just like, oh my gosh. And I mean, they sent us all, dating us, but CDs of the actual, thing. Incredible. So, yeah.
Jamie said he had street clothes on, and maybe Jamie and that Milton thought you guys were going to lose, said he basically had street clothes on, and they had to pull him out of the clubhouse to hit.
Yep. It was just insane. So, I mean, I didn't know how much I could share because I wasn't trying to throw these anybody under the bus, but yeah. It was like,
to Jamie's point, he always talked about Milton and just how talented he was, because that's not who Jamie was. Jamie had to work for everybody, but you play with that. I mean, you saw it. You play with guys like that, or you pick guys that are pitchers on their team. They come out built a little bit different than some guys that have to work for it. And that's not taking anything against those players. It's just that's the difference, and that's also how hard it is to make it too.
It is. I've been asked over the years, have you ever played with anybody that you felt like should have been Hall of Fame? I was like, well, first of all, I did play against some Hall of Famers, or future Hall of Famers. So, yeah, I saw that. But then there were some players that you thought were going to be just pure talent-wise, were going to be elite. I mean, elite major league players, and just never made it because of up here, or some little injury setback or whatever it was. But, I mean, I played with some guys that were 96, 97, absolute hammer-breaking ball, absolute filthy changeup, and couldn't get out of AA. And kind of was they just couldn't get out of their own way. And I saw that when I was scouting, you'd see some guys that were phenomenal, but then you go, when the lights come on, they just couldn't, perform. But then you'd see like guys like JC that were like, just didn't obviously have the pure talent or size or whatever it is, but they made the most of it. And he was in that same era of like David Eckstein and guys like that who just, I would say, outperformed what they were naturally given, and had phenomenal big league careers. So pretty cool.
How did you get connected to go to Puerto Rico and then Venezuela?
Yeah. So Puerto Rico was through actually an agent of one of my teammates. And just said I was looking to play some winter ball, went down there. Candidly didn't do great. And like I pitched well, but I didn't have good like end results as far as win and loss goes. But just an incredible experience. And then Venezuela, it was after that year in 99, I had kind of gotten into quote unquote prospect status. And, Tony Arm there and stuff. And so my manager was Luis Durante, who had, he spent some time in the big leagues with the Marlins and different things. I think the Expos as well. And so he said, Aggie, you want to come pitch in winter ball? And I was like, yeah, man. So I'm down in, Pastora, Venezuela. And at the time was a lot safer kind of than what it is now. Although there were some close incidents, but those were incredible experiences because that brand of baseball is just different than what we had grown up with in the United States. I mean, a lot. I remember in Venezuela we're playing and there's armed guards with shot-off shotguns, and we come to play our rivals, which I don't remember who that was, but everybody's telling me, oh, this is our rivals. And we go, okay. And they're like, we pull up to the clubhouse and they're shaking our bus and they're screaming at us and they're throwing ice and there was somebody had an M80 in the stands and they're throwing them at our right fielder. It was just like, what is happening? But what was really neat about that was, and they had cheerleaders, there was all sorts of stuff. But I remember pitching in that game, and I started out kind of scuffling and then kind of worked my way through. And by the end of it, I think I pitched into the seventh. And the fans kind of rally around you, right? They see like you've weathered the storm, you've weathered what the best they can give you, all the heckling, all the name calling, all the batteries being thrown, whatever it is. And then they recognize like when you performed well, which was really cool, So a lot of great memories in Venezuela.
Well, it's not like they could take a ton of Americans on those teams either. Plus, you're supplementing income too.
Oh, big time, especially back then. I mean, they've changed the minor leagues, but back then you went to winter ball and you were like, I could retire tomorrow. And, it wasn't a big amount of money, but to me back then I was like, oh my gosh. So it was great experiences, great culture, just the whole thing. And I still stay in touch with some of those guys on Facebook and different things. So it's neat.
Did you know you were going to get into scouting?
No. So, I'd always had an interest in it. Just, I think over time, some people will kind of tell you, hey, I think you have a strength in a certain area. And people always told me how observant and kind of cerebral I was as a player. And so I got into coaching, started a company that was in kind of the youth travel ball space. That's crazy town, so it gets unique, but I had actually the scout that drafted me was a guy named Matt Anderson. He's now on the big league scouting side with, or the pro scouting side with the Blue Jays. And so it's funny how we got connected. I get a call from one of my pastors at church, and he was like, "Hey, Aggie, there's a guy that's moved here from the East Coast, and I thought you'd be a good connection. He's a major league scout." And I said, "Do you remember his name?" And he goes, "No, I don't." He's like, "I think he's with the Blue Jays." And I was like, "Man, I don't really know anybody from the Blue Jays I could think of in the scouting world." And so anyways, a couple of weeks go by, I reach out to the guy again. I was like, "Hey, I haven't heard from this guy." I was like, "Can you give me his name and number?" So he gives it to me. I was like, "Matt Anderson?" I was like, "What?" I was like, "This is the guy that drafted me, back in 98." And this is like 2000, maybe 13, 14, somewhere in there. So we hadn't seen each other forever. And he comes in and, it's all these great memories and all this other stuff. And he actually brought me my draft card, right? Showed me what and I was like, I didn't need to see that because it wasn't the most glowing report, but we had an indoor facility. And so he came in there and he was like, "Hey, in the off season, you mind if I do some lessons?" And I was like, "Of course, And so the more and more he's coming in there, he's like, "Man, you really know these guys." And I said, "Well, I've had these guys since they're 11, 12 years old, in some cases." And I said, in Dallas-Fort Worth, there's just a hotbed of, big league talent, former big leaguers live here, all this other stuff. So, one day, like Bobby Witt Jr. is coming in our facility, and he's like, "Wait a second," and this is before Bobby was who he is now, right? I mean, Bobby's like 16 years old at the time. But you could just see the talent, Jordan Lawler, on and on. I mean, just studs. And so he goes, "Hey, would you ever be interested in scouting?" And I said, "Yes, I would." He goes, "Can you handle that with this?" I was like, "Well, this kind of," I said, "runs itself, so to speak." I said, "There's, we got good people in place, processes." And I said, "Yeah, I could certainly do that." So I ended up getting connected. He connected me with the Padres initially. And the guy who was, I don't remember his exact title, but I played with him in AAA. His name is Dave Post. And Posty, we were teammates for a short period of time. So I went in and they were like, "Hey, man, we already have an area guy in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it's kind of late in our hiring process, but would you be willing to move?" And at the time, I've got 3 kids and they were younger. I said, "Man, I can't pull them out of high school, senior year, all this other stuff." And so they said, "Well, would you be willing to kind of shadow our area guy," which is a guy named Matt Schaffner, and he's phenomenal. And I said, "Yeah, man." So the way I treat things is even if it's part-time, it's full-time to me, And so I said, "Hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to scout, I'm going to do this." And the Padres called me and said, "Hey, like, you've done a phenomenal job. The only opening we have is in Florida. Would you interview for it?" And then at that same time, they said, and they were really cool about it, they said, "If something comes up with another team in your area, we'll let you know." And I was like, "Man, that's awesome." So the Red Sox had an opening. They called me, I interviewed, and I grew up, like I said, a Red Sox fan. So this was like dream job. It was awesome. So I was with Padres for 1 year, just as a, kind of a bird dog. And then Red Sox full-time for 5 years. And then COVID happened, all that mess, stuff at home. I was like, "Man, I got to be home and make sure I'm here with my kids," and yada, yada. So that's why I got out of it. But I loved it. We got the World Series ring in 2018, which was incredible.
So how did you get down to Texas then to just start a facility?
A blonde.
Your wife's from Texas.
No, it wasn't my wife. So yeah, I was in spring training I think I was in, I think it was coming off my Tommy John surgery, if I remember correctly, but it was spring training time in Bradenton. I was with the Pirates and was walking around and see this blonde, and I'm single, and I go say hello, kind of hit it off, and a year and a half later, this is a hilarious story. She says, "Hey, if you want to get in the same space, or if we're going to make this go forward, we got to get in the same space." And I go, "Okay." And I'm living in Maryland. She's living down here in Dallas area. And I said, "Okay, so August 1st, 2005, drive down with my dad, drop me off. I got this little rent house because I don't know anybody in Dallas. In all my travels in baseball, I'd never been to Texas, which is weird as it sounds. But so I go to this area and I got this little rent house and we're like, okay, we're going to do this. August 3rd, she breaks up with me. So I don't know a soul. I mean, not a soul. And so anyways, I started doing some lessons. My background was in the financial industry, which is what I do full time. So I had another thing, but I was always passionate about the baseball and development. So I started doing lessons and things. And then out of that, it just kind of blossomed. And, now I've been here 18 years. It's crazy.
Do you feel like for scouting, Texas is the best state for high school and college players draft-wise?
I really do. I know people listen to this for like, oh, Southern Cal or, Arizona or Florida. But between Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, I mean, the level of talent and the people that are coming out of here is just off the charts. So I really felt fortunate because, I mean, you're not only talking about the high school levels, but also the junior colleges here, and seeing some of their success in the pool that they come out of. But then when you're also talking about like, Texas Tech and, OU's not far away. And of course, Dallas Baptist and UT and A&M. I mean, it's like, it's a who's who, TCU, and that was all in my scouting area. So whereas some people would come into regions, upper Midwest, and they might have, 20 guys on their list for the draft, I'm rolling in with 120, and going, we got some good talent here, guys. Like, take your pick, So
well, and for you too, like most guys don't get to start there. I mean, you pretty much got to start there. Most guys have to go to the Midwest and kind of cut their teeth a little bit before they get that opportunity. So it's tremendous for you.
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, I felt very fortunate, and I think that's where my background came in, playing, obviously, coaching, seeing things differently. And I always had a real simple philosophy when scouting, excuse me, and it was, if I felt like a guy could get to AA and stick and do well, then I would put him in for the draft. And so I would look for, and the reason for that is, as you know, like you get to AA and you're a prospect and do pretty well, like you're a day away from the big leagues. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have big league success, but when you're, in the scouting world, when you're putting grades on guys, you're not all saying, hey, they're going to be superstars. But when you could kind of see a Bobby Witt Jr. play against another guy that, you felt was, a draft pick, you go, okay, well, Bobby's probably going to be a superstar, but this guy also will probably make it to the big leagues, type thing. And then when you see, schools like I talked about, and, you see the TCUs of the world and Texas Techs and the talent that's coming out there, it just made it pretty easy to evaluate and say, hey, I think that these guys are going to have some real success. And it's panned out that way. I mean, there's been phenomenal success coming out of Dallas Fort Worth getting to the big leagues.
Did you have to do any pro scouting?
I did.
I know they don't do much of it anymore, where it's just pretty much amateur pro side, but did you have to go do some pro scouting then too?
I did, which was a lot of fun. So they would assign us a couple different teams. One of the years I had the Nationals and the Astros, I think it was. And so, you're watching Strasburg versus Verlander and, those sort of things. You're like, okay, what kind of report am I going to put on these guys, right? But it's actually really interesting at the pro level because you start to notice nuances that I think people, by and large, don't pay attention to. So I don't remember the guy's name, and I'm not trying to disparage him. But personally, I would always keep a track of swings and misses for hitters and for pitchers. But, there was this one hitter for the Nationals. I think he maybe had 3 or 4 years in the big leagues. He was a left-handed hitter. I really don't remember his name, but I noticed that every time he swung and missed, I would look at the scoreboard or the radar gun reading, and anything above 94, he wouldn't touch, just wouldn't touch it. And in the one series, I had to sit on him for 5 games. In that one series, he had like 8 or 9 swings and misses 94 above. So when you can put those type of details in your reports that are then hopefully used to later on, if you're going to face that team in the playoffs or something like that, like those are those little nuances that can really change the outcome for a major league club if the information is utilized well. So, I think those sorts of things with the Astros when we were, facing them in the playoffs, and you could, I don't know how much Alex Cora used that information scouts were putting in. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, he may have used all of it. He may have used none of it, but there were definitely some things that I put in reports that I think would have been helpful for guys, facing teams in playoffs.
Yeah, I saw your tweet about seeing Verlander here at Wrigley Field.
Yep. Yeah.
First time you've been to Wrigley?
First time I've been, yeah. So, it's weird. As an amateur, I played at Camden Yards. I got, selected to some all-star team at a high school. So I played at Camden. Been to a lot of big league ballparks along the way. Got to play in some big league parks and different things, but Wrigley had never been to. And so my oldest son, he's actually headed up to law school in Northern Illinois. And so he's like, we kind of found his apartment, did all this stuff. He starts this fall. And he said, hey, can we go to a game at Wrigley? I'm like, heck yeah, so just daytime game and getting to go see Verlander pitch and, all those guys on the Astros and then the Cubs. And you're just like, man, this is beautiful. So it was awesome.
I mean, being a lifelong Red Sox fan, how cool was it getting your World Series ring?
I can't even describe it. So I think, and there's a running joke within our organization when I coach that, like, after games, I'll always share some personal story. And they're like, here we go, Aggie story time again, right? Like, but here's the thing about that. So the game one was on October 24th at Fenway, right? And so what they did is they flew us up, me and my spouse, to Fenway for the first two games, scouting. And then, front office, they get to go to LA and do all that stuff because we were playing the Dodgers. But so we get to go first two games. Well, the 24th is my dad's birthday. And so my dad's in Maryland. I call my sister and I'm like, hey, I can get the ticket if you pay for the flight. And she was like, done. So he comes home from work and we're like, hey, pack your bags, and he's in Maryland, and basically pack your bags. You're going to Fenway with Brandon to watch the World Series on your birthday. And then, of course, they won, so it's just one of those amazing father-son moments. And he was the one who actually introduced me to the Red Sox. He brought home a program. We went to Boston for something and he brought home a program, and it was old gray uniforms. I don't know who was on it, like Rich Gedman or somebody, it wasn't like Yastrzemski or whatever, but I was like, oh my gosh, the Red Sox. And then fast forward to, following Clemens as a pitcher, and doing things like that when you see those guys and just I remember when they lost to the Mets in 86, I remember exactly where I was at. And then to be in 2018 and to, in the annals of Facebook, there's some great video of me watching Sale strike out Machado for the final out. And I lose my mind. I mean, it was so cool.
Do you like the changes to minor league baseball now?
I don't want to say I'm a baseball purist, right? Because I'm always about like, hey, how can we grow things? How can we get better? But I think some of the changes in minor league baseball are taking away the feel of the game. I've always been a big believer that you can't necessarily put your finger on the reasons behind success, right? So there's just the it factor, people talk about. Why does this kid or why does this guy have success in X, Y, and Z? And I feel like the changes in minor league baseball are becoming, specifically on the field, are making the game much more mechanical. Now, I'm not saying, hey, there's probably some good things to speed up the game a little bit. Personally, I don't mind watching a 3-hour game, but I know that your average fan may not. My kids are like, Dad, I don't want to go. It's so boring. I'm like, well, if you knew what was going on, you wouldn't think it was boring. But I think from a standpoint of the changes of pay raise, multiple buses, better food, better environment.
Better schedule, too. I've mentioned that multiple times. The 6 days in a row, I think, is a phenomenal change.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I think back in the day, and I could be wrong on this, but you can probably double check this. I think our schedule was at any point we would play 20 straight days and then an off day. And so when you're going 3 weeks in a row and you're beat up and you're banged up and you're on a bus for, like when I was in Harrisburg and we go up to Portland to play, Sea Dogs. I mean, you're talking an 11, 12-hour bus ride overnight. You're cramped up, whatever. And then you're expected to perform at the elite level and your career's on the line. I don't think that's good. So I think having multiple buses, taking some of the pressure off financially, because I used to, literally in the off season, I would pull the most oddest jobs you could ever find just to make money. But then you're being asked to perform at the elite level. And I'm not saying you can't do it. And I'm thankful for kind of the grind because I think it taught me a lot of life lessons post career. But I think it was very hard for me to feel like a professional baseball player at some levels when you're making, $7,000-8,000 a year, and then trying to go out and do the training necessary to do that, or like just putting mileage on your arm. For me as a pitcher, 99, I threw, I don't know what it was, but I want to say it was 140 plus innings coming off being a reliever. And then all of a sudden I have to go to winter ball to, play in Venezuela. And so I didn't have an off season, and I don't think it hurt me. And that's a whole nother thing, because I think that guys don't throw enough today. People go, well, you had Tommy John surgery. Well, I didn't have Tommy John surgery until I was 29, right? Which means if you're not having that till 29, from the time I was 15 years old, and I was a two-way player in high school, center field and pitcher, and I threw long toss probably 5 days a week, did all that type of stuff, workouts, running, whatever the case may be, and then would take batting practice every day. It was the guy I played for was actually an ABCA Hall of Famer, Bernie Walter, up in Maryland. So he's since deceased, but he was a great mentor. But probably from the time I was 15 years old through age 29, I played 120, 150 ball games a year. And my arm generally felt great until it didn't. But that was, way down the road.
I'm glad you brought it up because we talk about long toss a lot on here because I'm a huge proponent of it. And yep. I agree with you that those of us that have been around it feel like kids don't play catch enough. They throw too much off the mound, but they don't play catch enough.
Yeah, they don't even know how to play catch. No. And
my little league, I learned as a 6, 7, 8-year-old how to long toss.
Absolutely.
That was our training. Go through a proper warm up, but we knew how to stretch it out.
Yeah. So getting into that aspect, pitching obviously is a true passion, and teaching it and those sort of things. But I'm very process oriented when I teach young players how to throw in general. Forget pitching for a second, just throwing. And they'll go, well, hey, I've got to pitch 20 pitches tomorrow. Should I throw long toss today? Or I'm going to the showcase and I'm going to have to throw 10 pitches in front of, off a mound or whatever. Should I throw today? And I'm like, what? And you're like, yes, And so I think part of the reason why you're seeing so many injuries, yes, force velocity for sure, right? Bodies aren't able to handle it mechanically, biomechanically, stress-wise, but at the same time, I think kids just aren't preparing their bodies, right? And so even when I was in the minors, we spent, I bet you 5 days a week I threw long toss, easy. And I'm talking not just distance, but hey, let's see if we can go to foul line to foul line. And our pitching coaches didn't ever say anything, and my arm honestly felt great all the time. I would play short catch where we come in and do kind of, you throw with your throwing partner and then you get down and give us targets. Every throw I ever made was always to a target. And people would say, oh, how do you have such good command? And I'm like, well, I practice it, it was intentionality. And so that's one of the big things that I think is lacking in the game today is just intentionality of throwing, how to increase. I have this saying, it's a not so famous saying, but it's not an accident. Good or bad, it's not an accident, right? So if you're creating a process that's going to help create success, whether it's command-wise, whether it's arm strength-wise, whether it's whatever it is, you're going to have success. It doesn't mean you're going to go from, hey, I'm throwing 86 and all of a sudden I'm going to throw 95, but maybe it teaches you how to get your arm further out front. Maybe your 86 turns into 88. Now the perceived velocity to a hitter is now 92. The reaction time is different. The difference between a pop-up and a strikeout, or a home run and a ground out, whatever it is. But all these little incremental changes, I think so many times in the game today, people are looking for huge changes instead of just going, hey, I gained 2 or 3 miles per hour over the course of a year. I did it in a healthy manner. My nutrition was on point. My weight training was on point. When I graduated high school, I was 6'1", 150-ish. My body couldn't handle 93, right? And so I always tell that story to people because weighted balls are nothing new. And I'm not disparaging anyone else, right? But they're not new, right? And so we did them initially in high school. We did them initially in college. Personally, I did not find great success with them. I felt like there was a lot of stress that I felt personally on my arms. So I was just like, man, I'm going to stick to long toss. I'm going to stick to the bands. I'm going to stick to just running and training at the gym. And again, a little bit antiquated, more Rocky style. We didn't have all the stuff, but I thought it was like really helpful. And so my path, probably when I graduated high school, I was probably routinely 85, 86, and obviously got a ton of scholarship offers, different time frame. 85, 86 wouldn't even get me in the door at half the colleges today. But yet I obviously had a really good collegiate and professional career. So it was not until I was a senior, maybe a junior in the Cape Cod League, I think was the first time where I would start to really sit over 90 miles per hour, 91, 92. But that was a, 5 or 6 year journey for me to get there, and
Verlander talked about it during spring training. He had a great, phenomenal interview during spring training, talking about the gradual increments. And that's also a mastery piece too, is people try to rust the process on that now, where it's just a mastery piece over time with it.
Well, and I'm glad you use that word mastery, because I really feel like that's what's lacking is a lot of people.
Go ahead. Some of it's the patience of just, okay, you're going to work on this one thing for a little bit.
Yep.
This is the one thing you're going to focus on working on, whether it's long toss, whether it's your fastball command, where you're going to work on, you're going to spend time on this one thing for a while. Once you get that down, then start layering the next piece on.
Yeah, 100%, and so people don't realize, like, they're so short-sighted in a lot of cases, or they go to an event thinking, oh, I've got to do this in order to meet this criteria. And candidly, some of the coaches out there are almost forcing players into that. I mean, I had this conversation with a player the other night who's in the transfer portal, and he's like, man, I talked to X school, and they told me I got to be 93 in order to get my foot in the door. And the school that he was talking about, I was like, what? Like, nothing against that school, but I was like, dude, if you're 87, 88 and you have 2 pitches for strikes, you're going to be effective in that league. But so I think they're being told, hey, I've got to skip all these steps of mastery and I've just got to throw hard. And like, one of the things I really admire about Verlander, Clemens did it, Nolan Ryan did it, Schilling did it. I mean, Smoltz did it. I mean, all these type of guys is, I call it the cruising speed, right? So if your body is capable of 100, but you can get outs at 95, 96, and it takes the RPMs down, and takes the pressure off and your body's used correctly, then why aren't we doing more of that? And then you get in the tight situation, hey, tie ball game, runner on third, less than 2 outs. All right, I need a little bit more. Boom, here's 98, here's 99, right? It's there, but you're not pushing the pedal down, running the race car in the red, every single pitch. And I think that's contributing to a lot of the things. And Verlander, prime example, I know at his age now, maybe it's not as much, but back in the day, he would get stronger and stronger and stronger as the game went. So he might start out in
college. His freshman and sophomore year was my last 2 years at James Madison. So I saw it up close and personal, same stuff he does in the big leagues. He did as a college kid, where he saved a lot for the back end. But some of that's how pitching is managed now. We've almost turned everyone into relievers.
Right.
Like, they know they may not go 3 times through the order. Back in the old days, you knew you were going to have to probably get 4 times through the order and maybe a 5th time if you're going. So I think guys just gradually knew how to back off a little bit, because they knew they're going to have to go out and do it all over in 4 or 5 days, where I think now it's almost, we've turned everyone into sprinters, because they know they don't have to go as long.
100%. I mean, a large part of my career was spent as a starter, And so my mindset was I'm going 9, right? Now, it wasn't happening a ton, but there were times, but you'd get into the 6th inning and I was throwing different pitches in the first 2 times through the lineup, saving that certain pitch or saving some velo for at bat number 4 against a 2-hole or 3-hole hitter. And they just don't do that anymore. It's just like rip it as hard as you can, throw it as hard as you can, spin it as much as you can. One of the things that I've been surprised about, I say surprised just because I saw it, kind of happening as a scout and some of the meetings we were having internally, but I don't have a problem with analytics inherently, right? Like, again, I think information's good, right? If you can solve some problems quicker, great. But I think there is a part of the major league game that is being lost from the feel perspective. And this is, and I'm being serious, I honestly feel like I would not have a World Series ring if not for what the Dodgers did analytically in games 1 and 2. So Walker Buehler is shoving it up our butts, right? And, he's the future of the organization, and they pull him out.
Happened with Blake Snell in the Rays, too.
Correct, yeah. What was that, like 58 pitches?
They win that World Series if they leave him, man. Sorry, Kevin. I coach Kevin Cash in the Cape, so sorry, Kevin. I doubt listening to this. He's got bigger fish to fry, but I'm watching that game in Texas with Zach Dillon. We're running an event with the 12, and we're watching that game, and I'm like, there's no way he should be coming out of this game right now. He's cruising. Whoa. And it gave the momentum is a thing. Like whether I know people don't like talking about that now, but momentum is an actual thing, and especially if you have a pitcher that's just handing it to you and you take that pitcher out, the other team's going to get a momentum boost off that.
Yep. It's there's no one that could convince me otherwise. There's no one that could convince me otherwise. Because I've seen it too often in my own life, right? You're like, hey, that's a momentum shifter, right? And we would just say that, but everybody knew what was happening. And we're like, oh no, the leadoff walk happened, or this happened, whatever it was. And it did shift the mindset. People got a little tighter, or if you're on the other end of that, you get a little motivated, whatever it is. It's a real thing. But yeah, the Dodgers made that decision, and then the next night, same thing with Rich Hill, I think it was pitching it, and he's dealing as well, and nobody could touch him, and all of a sudden they pull him, and we're just like whack, 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 and I'm just like, what are they doing?
Got the rest of the offseason to recover.
Yeah, that's what I said.
But that's part of the build-up process too for pitchers. Like, okay, this is the end of the year. They've been built up for this point. To allow them to get stretched out a little bit. Yes, I think at the youth and travel side, we've got it backwards. We're stretching kids out too early, too soon. Yeah. And you get to deal with a 26, 27, 28-year-old man.
Right.
They've had all that year to get built up and stretched out to where you could push them if you needed to. If the moment, and that's where the moment, if the moment presents itself in baseball that he's going to deal, let him go.
It's the World Series.
Yes, it's the World Series.
Like, and the excuse that was made after the game for Walker Buehler in particular, well, he was at 104 or 103, and we're like, and?
He probably got 40 or 50 more last time out. He probably got 40 or 50 more. And again, this isn't youth in high school. This is not your conversation. This is dealing with professional adults.
So speaking of that, if I may go there, I've seen this with high school a lot because in this area, people know that I'm conservative in my pitching approach. And so I get a lot of calls from some of the high school pitchers in the area or dads, or text me, hey, what should my pitch count be? So just like I had a spring training, I would start throwing generally January 1, spring training, February 10th-ish, right? I'm going down my first couple bullpens as a starter, building up for April 1. Or maybe like 2025, I'm not airing it out. I'm not doing all this stuff. And then gradually would work into it. Well, some of these high school coaches down here, these players do not understand a process. But the high school baseball season starts February 15th, and all of a sudden they're 100 pitches out of the gate. 100. And I'm going, what? And so I've seen guys literally, and they changed the rule in Texas a few years ago, but now it's 110. But you can finish the batter. So if you're 110 and, your first pitch to that batter is 110. Well, you could go another 7-8 pitch at bat, in that guy to finish that. So now you're at 117, 118 in February for a 17-year-old. Makes no sense to me whatsoever.
We were hoping to maybe get 80, but their last bullpen was 100 pitches before they threw 80 against someone else. And the other piece of that, and we talked about this in the travel baseball forum that we had, they brought up a good point with some of the tournament providers. I think coaches get confused sometimes because that's a feel thing too. Just because it's 80 pitches doesn't mean they should throw 80 pitches. Like maybe if he's laboring, maybe you only get 40 or 50 out of him that outing if they're really laboring. Like those are the things where I think we need to do a better job with the narrative. Is like just because it says this is the pitch limit doesn't mean you should throw them that entire time. Because if they're cruising, cool, I get it. But if a kid's laboring, you probably need to get him out of there before that.
Well, one of the things that I go out and our organization has tried to adhere to that. I mean, I remember pulling a guy out many years ago. He was throwing a no-hitter, and he was cruising, but he wasn't built up yet to be able to go beyond 70 pitches. And so I go out, and I said, hey, man, like, I know you're not going to like this, but I got to take you out. And it's like, what? And after the game, mom's blowing me up and all this other stuff. And I said, you're 15 years old. And this kid, I think this past year was actually his last year in pro ball. And I told him, I said, I'm protecting your future. You may not view it that way. I know a no-hitter feels good when you're 15, but I was like, I'm protecting your future. And then the way that we term it with our coaches when because they always ask me, hey, what's the pitch count for this budget? And we give guidelines, but I say, hey, use your judgment. We always say, how much traffic was he in, right? Is it first and second constantly? He's pitching out of the stretch and it's a lot of pitch count, or it's high pitch counts. It's a lot of foul balls, this and that. I'm like, that guy might only get 40 or 50 pitches that day, even though he might be able to go 75 or 80. And then the flip side is like, hey, man, you're at 70 pitches and you are rolling. Like, it's as easy as could be. Are you cool with another inning? And I might let him go 82 or 83. And the thing that gets me is if you're truly talking about development, and in high school baseball, they usually throw their number 1 and 2 in the playoffs. What about the 3 guy? What about the 4 guy? What about the 5 guy that has not seen the field hardly at all season? And then you're throwing them into the fire in the playoffs. They're not ready for that, and mentally, not just physically, but mentally as well. And so I think that there is a way to win and develop, but people, either it's an art to it and maybe people haven't figured out that art, but I have seen it more and more times. I'm like, we had a really good 17 or 16U team last summer, and not one pitcher threw over 75 pitches. And most of the guys were like 50 to 60. And we had 9 guys throwing. And I would just go, all right, your turn. All right, your turn. And at first, people were like, well, how are we going to win? How are we going to win? Because they're used to that 110 pitches with the number 1 guy or the number 2 guy. And I'm like, this is development, right? And I don't care about the wins and losses at that. I'm saying, hey, I'm preparing you and showing you how to do this properly, because we've got to keep a big picture in mind. So,
and by the way, you end up winning more games late because everybody's fresh. They're sharp. They're fresh. Everybody feels good still. They've been able to work on it because they're all getting innings. There's a way to do both. And people always get short-sighted on that beginning of the year stuff, but it's a long season. You need to be focused on those last 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season on the back end of it, and this is what we're going to look like if you do it right.
Well, and the confidence too, right? So like you get a player that's, let's say he's quote unquote number 4 or 5 on a staff, but he's gotten regular innings throughout the year. And now he comes in and it's first and second, nobody out. And he's left-handed. They got 2 lefties up. He doesn't go, oh my gosh, and freeze up. He goes, oh, I've been here before. No big deal. And that's that momentum. I think that shifts a lot of things.
Do you ever think player development gets more say-so in the draft, or is it stay like it is now with drafting players? Because you talk about that feel, and obviously the player development guys see a different side of it than the scouts do. And I see both sides of that conversation, but was just wondering what you thought.
I think they should absolutely have some more feedback in it, but I think it needs to be real-world feedback, not video feedback, right? And I'm just being honest, right? This is where So the Red Sox, when I was with them, we'd have these internal meetings, which I thought was good, right? And in our reports, we would say, hey, this is for player development. Here's some things I saw. But that is one person's trying to be as objective as possible, right? But then you're giving that to a third party. So I would call some of the player development staff from time to time and say, hey, here's what you're getting with this guy. But to your point, I think all these teams are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on player development. Make a $500 plane flight and some meal money and get a couple of PD guys out to some scouts with some guys that are priority on the list so that they can see what this player's doing. And I'm not talking for one game. Give them 3, 4, 5 games, right? Let them be a scout for a minute and go, hey, because I think when you have that integration across all levels, it elevates everything. I think it elevates what you're going to get, the end product on the field for sure.
And it's almost like sending the amateur scouts to go do pro scouting for a little bit, where you recalibrate the eyes a little bit and then have a little bit better understanding. And then if you do end up getting that kid, then you've already had your eyes on them. You kind of know what they are and what they aren't. And maybe from the player development side, okay, I've already seen this kid. Here's maybe what he's going to have to work on when they eventually get to us.
Yeah, so they would send us to fall ball, whatever they would do, down at the complex in Fort Myers, as scouts to go see what's happening in player development. But I thought it should always be flipped, right? I was like, hey, it's great that we're down here. I love Florida, but like send these guys up to us for a weekend series. If I'm sitting on Texas Tech and TCU in a big series and we know that I've got 15 guys on my draft board in here, send a couple PD guys up and let's get their input. I mean, that's just, but I'm not running an organization. So.
I know. How did you know it was time to kind of pivot to everything that you're doing now?
Can I speak bluntly?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. This is always an open and honest conversation. I think not everybody's been in your shoes and my shoes. Like, I think it adds a different layer for people that haven't been on that side of things and don't know exactly how it all works. So, yes, It's always an open and honest conversation with that stuff.
This is going to sound arrogant, but I don't mean it to, because it goes back to all the coaches that taught me along the way. I felt like my level of understanding and expertise was better than what the position I was going to be able to be in it eventually. I wasn't going to be able to make an impact in a way that I felt I could really benefit a team. And that wasn't me saying, look at me, not by any stretch of imagination. It was just like, hey, things that other people were viewing as high level, I was viewing as like, man, that's kind of an elementary concept, and I wouldn't say that to them, right? But I'm thinking, well, this guy is being promoted over me potentially, or I'm going to have to pay significant dues at, in my 40s in order to reach something. And I'm like, what am I chasing here? Because I've never been like, oh, I work for a major league team, or that's never been my style. So it was just like, I just really wanted to help an organization grow and develop and build. And I just felt like I wasn't going to get that opportunity. And so I said, well, or at least I wasn't going to get that opportunity in a manner where I might have been behind 6 other guys, or GM changes. And now all of a sudden that whole staff is out. Now I'm resetting. And I'm like, I'm not 25, I'm 45. And I've got a wife and 3 kids I've got to think about. And I can't just play this game, to me, which was silly. And so in my own life, I see a kid or I see a man, doesn't matter, or a woman, and I think that they've got great qualities and their experience lends to it, and they're intellectual and they're intelligent and they can present ideas well. I'm hiring that person immediately and elevating them to the proper position. I'm not going to make them pay dues. They've paid their dues. They paid it in different ways. So that was, I know that's a long answer, but I felt like that was the issue, is I just wasn't going to be in a position that I felt could really benefit a team. And it was just kind of, it got a little bit boring for me, and it got a little bit taxing family-wise, obviously. So that was the main thing.
When did you decide to write a book?
Yeah, so it's interesting sometimes the people who will motivate you. So my ninth grade English teacher, we were studying Shakespeare, which I don't remember any of it, right? All I know is the guy's name was Shakespeare. but we had to write some papers in that class, and she did not like me. All right, I was kind of the goof off kid, always had some sort of sarcastic comment, whatever it was. So we were not, friends. We were kind of battling a little bit, and she gave me every paper I wrote, A plus, A plus, and she'd write some comment on it. So she pulls me aside and she goes, "Hey, you have a real ability to communicate in your writing." I was like, "What?" I was like, "I thought you hated me, right?" I'm 15 years old, whatever it is. And she's like, "No, you really do." And I was like, "Okay." So then fast forward, I get into college and I'm majoring in communication, and I started to understand, nuanced writing. I'm taking these different classes, classical writing and all the different things and communication. And I thought, wow, I'll do that. And then so when I started doing lessons, I was 22 years old, and people will say, "Hey, you really communicated that well." And that was a way that I could understand it. Or the parent would say that was a way that my son really, you put it in such a simplistic way on these very, tough topics or whatever we're going over, high level stuff. I was like, okay. So someone said to me, "You should write a book." And I said, all right. And so I wrote the book, not as hey, this is going to be New York Times bestseller. This was like more of a passion project where I thought maybe I can help some parents who are coming up through this process with teaching their 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old. But then I also wanted to touch on some high level things, kind of the marriage between technology, Rapsodo, TrackMan, different things like that. And for these, because I would get, current pro players in our facility in the off season, and I never wanted to step on toes of who they were dealing with. But I was like, hey man, like I saw that there was a huge need out there. And so I just wrote this short little book, it's 100 pages, super easy read.
Did you have a writing process? Did you sit down like specifically during the time of the day to write, or did you just, as ideas came to you, sat down and wrote?
Yeah, great question. So my brain works really well between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. I think it goes back to the minor league time where you're just used to like your brain's going at that time. That was
my study time in college.
Yeah.
It's completely flipped now because I've had but back then that was my study time in college.
Yeah, same here. So my process was I wanted to walk, because it's around pitching. So I wanted to walk people through essentially start to finish. If you showed up at the field from the time you got to the field, here's what it would look like till you got end of game. And so that's kind of how I thought about the book. I didn't want it to be all, splattered all over the place. I wanted to have a consistent process, but really I would just sit up at 9 o'clock at night and I go, okay, what does a pitcher do, in their off day? What does a pitcher do when they show up at the park? What are the things that they can do, should do? And assuming, of course, everybody's going to have a different process that they like. Some guys are like, hey, I want to do band work. Some people are like, hey, I just want to stretch out. I want to listen to music. But I wanted to take them through that and then talk about functional things in the game, how to hold runners, what we're looking for, what we're thinking about when we're viewing a hitter swing, because I think that's a big missed thing nowadays. So when I'm coaching our teams now, I don't call any pitches. And people are like, what? You don't control? And I was like, no. I was like, I want them and the catcher to start. Now, we have signs for me to call pitches. So like the only time I step in and call pitch is if, let's say a guy fouls 2 fastballs straight back and I see that they're getting ready to throw another fastball. I'm like, no, right? I'm like, he's on your pitch, right? But that's the mistake, is like sometimes a guy will, hit an absolute linea, a right-handed hitter in the first base dugout, and then they want to change pitch. I'm like, he's late. He's not on your fastball. Change location with that fastball, And so all that to say is those are the type of things I want to communicate in the book. Was just, hey, let me get this out of my brain on the paper that maybe we can help some younger pitchers, older pitchers, but all of it was to also help alleviate injury. So I talk about, the long toss, and I talk about routines and I talk about, not throwing enough. And I know Nolan Ryan was a huge proponent of throwing more. And this is the thing that
Andy Bennis said it in my kitchen in Iowa City. I'm coaching at the University of Iowa, but his son and Jake Berger. So Shane Bennis and Jake Berger are playing on they're like freshmen in high school. But Andy and Mike Berger, their dads, come to my kitchen with my dad, and Andy talked the entire time. He was like, they don't throw enough on the side. They don't throw enough on the side.
Well, let's think about this from big picture historical. So a couple things. So 94%, and I heard this recently, so I can't quote where it was from. I heard it from someone who had looked it up. It said 94% of pitchers in the Hall of Fame all had deliveries that went over the head. 94%. And I've always said that there was something to a flow-based delivery versus what I call a static delivery as far as alleviating stress, doing those sort of things. But you don't see it anymore. You see the sidestep, the lift, the throw, and then people trying to throw the ball through a wall. And I go, from a hitter's perspective, that's just timing. And so I did a DVD way back in the day, and I mentioned the concept of actual velocity versus perceived velocity. So actual, 95 from back here, or actual 95 from out there. They're still 95, but one's going to look harder, feel harder, whatever. Pronate more, maybe you get more movement on the ball. Like, there's going to be ancillary benefits to those sort of things. But so when you go back to that Hall of Fame thing, you look at Bob Gibson, you look at Nolan Ryan, you look at all these type of people, they were throwing 300 plus innings a year. They were throwing every day. They didn't have all the nutrition. They didn't have all the, science behind everything. But they also had what we talked about. They had an understanding of pitching. They had an understanding of cruising speed. They knew there was more in the tank when they had it or when they needed it. But there were also 4-man rotation, not 5. So you're like, how are we increasing exponentially the injuries that are happening when we have a history that says, hey, we don't have to do it this way and we can win, which is ultimately the thing when you're talking about, high school, college, professional baseball.
And strikes too. If we had college pitchers that were having a hard time throwing strikes,
yes,
even if they wouldn't do it in games, they'd go over their head every once in a while just to try to get some rhythm and some feel and some flow going back to their delivery. To add some athleticism into their delivery.
That's it right there, that athleticism. A lot of people will come in saying, and I would always ask questions around lessons. I go, hey, what are we trying to accomplish? And of course, the kid would say, well, I'm having trouble with this. And Dad would be like, well, we think he can throw harder, right? That's the whole thing. And I'm just like, okay. So I always tell people this. I said, I will never promise you velocity improvement. But what I do know is that if we get your body working right, if we get you more athletic, if we start to understand relationship between lower half, upper half, extension, doing things like this, you're probably going to throw harder, right? And so we had a player that came in recently, and he had Tommy John surgery 2 years ago. He's a senior in high school now. And he came in, he's like 91, 92, kind of a bulldog, whatever. But he was like, break hard on that front side, rip through with the upside, and it was just trying to throw it. And I go, hey, man, are you open to a discussion? Because I think you're headed for Tommy John number 2. And I was just real blunt with him. And he was like, seriously? And I said, yeah. So I just walked him through some simple things, tried to explain to him how I thought his body could operate better. I didn't talk about weighted balls. I didn't talk about that. I just said, hey, let's see if we can get your body to move better. Took some video from the beginning to the end. And I said, it might feel a little awkward at first, but like, I'm seeing as a scout and as a former pitcher, I said, I'm seeing your ball do things that it didn't do when you first walked in the door that are positive. I said, are you open to this? Yeah. Well, then all of a sudden he texts me, and this is 2 months after we met, and he's been on the process, following this stuff. Now he's 95, 97. Well, guess what? Now every big college in the country is coming after him, and they're calling me going, hey, can you tell me about this kid? I'm like, dude, like, this wasn't magic. This was just somebody taking the time, showing a young man how their body can operate well. And if the player takes to it, they always say the teacher appears when the student's ready, right? This student was ready. That's all it was. But I wasn't dropping any incredible knowledge bombs.
I'm sure just his lead knee and his glove are breaking on time, and the ball's in a good position to throw from when his front foot lands.
Correct. Correct. That's all I did.
Y'all do it a lot different, but those are some common things.
Common things.
The lead knee and the glove breaks on time, and then the ball's in a good position to throw from when their front foot lands.
Well, and I always use the example of Clemens back in the day because he was, kind of everybody knew who he was. And I said the difference in Roger Clemens on the day where he's touching 98, 99 and when he's 92 to 94 is timing, right? And I said it's not, his body's not any weaker. His arm's not any weaker. He doesn't feel worse or whatever it is. And I'm not discounting like, hey, maybe he didn't sleep well or this or that, but it's truly timing. So a lot of the things that I work with from a simplistic standpoint with players, no matter what age or what level they're at, is just timing. Hey, and that goes back to the catch play, right? How do you play catch? How are you doing long toss? Where do you learn those things, right? Like you see guys playing long toss and you're like, hey, your wrist is way back here and the ball's launching. Like, let's get on top of that ball. Let's get it out, and they're like, oh, but I can't get it as far right now. I was like, you can. See, you're looking at just getting it to the guy. I'm looking at what your body's doing to get it there. And I was like, you may have to, bounce it to him a couple times for, 20 feet in front of him. I said, but eventually as your body acclimates, and then 2 weeks later, guess what? That kid is now throwing further and properly. And, my arms never felt this good. And I'm having this success on the mound. And I'm like, that's what this is about. And that goes for infielders and outfielders too.
They long toss just as much as our pitchers did, our position players. Yes. In 22 years when I was coaching, our position players long toss just as much. Yep. And by the way, we never had any arm injuries.
Ever.
And guys could play catch every day. We would have played catch 7 days a week if we didn't have to take an off day.
Right.
Because of the NCAA, we would have played catch 7 days a week. And I got that from my dad a long time ago. The natural progression of it really was kind of the newer model where 2 days a week, you were really getting after the long toss, but you were still throwing. But after that day of really getting after the long toss, it went back to 50%. So you weren't going out as far, but we were still getting after it. And a lot of it was the lower half. They used their lower half. They weren't dead flat-footed with their feet. So all the pressure's not going into their old elbow and their shoulder. So there was a lot of athleticism and flow, even with our position players for arm health issues. And it worked. It
worked. Bottom line,
it worked. And you talked about kind of the old school Rocky stuff.
Yep.
With long-term athlete development people, that's a cross-training piece, which is healthy for kids because you're not doing the same things over and over. So some of that cross-training, old school stuff you did in the old days helped because yes, you might be crawling, you might be jumping, you might be hopping, you're doing a bunch of different things, but there's some health components to that too.
There are, and they've shown that over time. Like if you do these same repetitive type stuff without training a muscle in a different manner, whatever sports, we'd always encourage our guys, hey, play multiple sports. And until a level, right? Like if you have a guy that's going to be a D1 player or potential pro prospect on the baseball side, and in football, he's just, not that level, then you go, hey man, you got banged up last year in football. Maybe you don't play football your senior year. If you feel like you can handle it, great. But if not, like maybe that's when you make that decision. But from age, 10 until 17, play multiple sports. Get your body acclimated to doing things, lateral movement, jumping, explosive movements, learning eye-hand coordination, doing all those type of things. And
competing in different sports too is beneficial. Or competing in anything. Like we talked about music.
Anything. Yep.
Adam and I talked about this week. It might be competition in music. It might be competition in speech. I mean, you can compete in other things outside of the athletics arena that are going to carry over to the athletic side of it too.
So you asked about process, and you brought up something that I think is really important for coaches that are going to listen to this. And I say but it's not just me. I learned this from a lot, and I actually learned this from Bernie Walter. And two things. One was we did a no talk warm up. So everybody, we never spoke. And I have a really good story about that. But the other thing was he would say, all right, we're going to learn functional movement first. So we're going to learn the technique first. We're going to add speed, weight, or force. And then we're going to add competition. It's a simple thing, but like that is huge. Whether you're going through a lesson, whether you're going through a batting practice, whether you're going through a bullpen. So like when we're doing live live bullpen sessions, I might start out with the guy that's struggling in some sort of functional thing, timing or whatever it is. And then we're going to go, okay, seems like you got that now. Now we're going to add speed to that. Let's move our body a little faster, right? We're going to start to get in the mindset of competing, break a sweat doing that. And now we're going to put a hitter in the box, right? Now, there may be a bullpen and the guy's just standing in, but in your mind, you've now gone to, game mode, right? And I think that's huge. And so to your point about throwing all the time, and one of the big things about the no-talk warm-up that Bernie used to teach us, there was a guy named Ray Wright who played at LSU. He made the catch back in the day, like over, it was phenomenal, right? I can't remember what year that was, maybe like whenever LSU won back in the late 90s. But anyways, he asked me to come out and work with his 16-year-old team. And he goes, man, these guys are loaded. I go, okay, great. I go, what time does practice start? And he says, whatever it was, 4:00. So, okay. So I get out there about 3:30, and I just wanted to watch the guys, just literally observe the guys, how the pitchers would go through whatever they were doing. And so they're getting out there, and of course they're talking about, did you see this girl in school? Did you see that? Xbox, or back in the day it was probably PlayStation or Nintendo or something like that. And I counted from the start of their throwing program in 12 minutes. That's what their program was. 12 minutes, 46 errant throws, 46. And then, so I brought them all in and I said, all right, guys, I'm going to be back out here tomorrow. We talked about some little things. I said, but tomorrow, I want you here at this time. I want you here ready to go, all this other stuff. So we get out the next day and same thing. I said, we're going to do 12 minutes. So we're going to ramp up the intensity a little bit. And I said, and we're just going to change one thing. You're not allowed to talk. If I see you talk, if I hear you talk, it's 5 miles. So I put some, hurting on them a little bit, right? And I don't know these guys, right? So they're like, who is this guy, right? Who does he think he is? Now I was probably in AA or AAA at the time. So, there was a little bit of like, he's in pro ball. But, so we did the same exact thing. All I did was change that one dynamic. And remember, I increased intensity. So I'd be like, throw harder, throw, whatever. Because it was that type of day where they needed to. And there was only 3 errant throws. So how do you subtract 43 errant throws?
Just with concentration and focus. That's a peak performance. Everybody talks about mindfulness. Those are peak performance mindfulness things of being mindful in the activity and being fully present in that activity. And that cleans a lot of things up of just being fully present doing those activities.
It really does. Yeah. It was awesome.
How does this go to a book then to an app?
Yeah. So when I was scouting, so let me back up first. So I'm 22 years old. Guy comes in and he's a stud. And I'm just like, he's probably 18. He was a senior in high school. And I said, man, this was in Maryland. And it was my first lesson. And he goes, we get done. And I said, oh, man, I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you, where are you going to play college baseball? Remember, he's a senior. It's probably like November timeframe. He goes, I'm not. And I was like, do you not want to play? And his dad was there. And his dad was like, no, we'd love to play. He said, but we're not getting any offers, anything. And I said, seriously? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, we pay this service a lot of money. It was almost $5,000. And this is 25 years ago. He goes, we just haven't heard a thing in 6 months from anyone at the place or whatever. And not to disparage them, I'm just telling the story. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, where did you want to go? And so he told me where he wanted to go. And I said, well, I know the pitching coach there. And he said, really? I said, yeah. I said, did you have a video or anything? And he goes, yeah, they had the Blu-ray disc. I mean, that's how long ago it was. So he brings it in. And within 15 seconds, I go, this is why you have no offers. If this is what is being sent out, this is why you have no offers. And he's like, man, we don't have another 5,000. I was like, no. I'm not going to charge you. I just have a theory and I just want to help you. I like, you definitely have the ability to play Division I baseball, like no doubt. And this is fascinating to me. So me and another one of my pro teammates, we were living in the off season together. And I was like, hey man, we're going to get together. We're going to reshoot this thing, whatever. And we did it. And so We reshot it, did it appropriately, put together the whole like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and a nice little profile, so they know academics, did all that. And again, we didn't have social media. So I sent the disc and I made the phone call. I just called up the guy and I said, hey, got this guy. If you have a need, that's how I always approach. I'm never selling a player, anything like that. If you have a need, this is a guy you might want to take a look at. He says, okay, right. Well, a month goes by or whatever, and these guys come in for a lesson. It was after Christmas and holidays and all this stuff. And he's like, they're beaming ear to ear. And I was like, what's up? And they're like, we got a 60% offer. And I was like, what? I was like, when did you go down there? And he goes, we didn't. I said, what do you mean? He said, it was the video and your recommendation. So now all of a sudden I'm like, ding, 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 ding. And I've always been entrepreneurial, but I started talking to my pro teammates in spring training. I said, hey, why did you choose the college you went to? How was your recruiting process? Someone, because obviously you coach, but they would be like, my girlfriend went there, or I like the mascot, or, it was like the most random things. So you could tell that people really didn't have a process around it. And so fast forward now, I'm scouting and I'm looking around, I'm at the ballpark and I run into this 16-year-old kid that I know, 16. And he says, Aggie, I really want to play college baseball. He's like, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, okay, what do you mean? I said, you throw pretty well, you do this. He's like, yeah, but the process. And so we just start talking about it. Here's the problems the scouts have. And when I say scouts, college coaches, pro scouts, here's the problems the parents have because they're following these things that aren't actually applying to their son. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not applying in general to some pieces of the college recruiting process. But then I was also seeing like the players having problems because they were, like I said, sometimes they put themselves out there to showcase in a position they shouldn't be. So a guy would go in as a left fielder that runs an 8-flat 60 and he could really hit. And I'm like, why aren't you going in as a first baseman? Right? Just little nuances. And so I tell the kid this and he goes, you need an app. And I go, that's great. I don't know how to do an app. And he says, he goes, I do. And I said, what? I said, you're 16 years old. He goes, well, that's what I want to do. He's like, I've already built one. He showed me it on the app store. He'd gamified something. He's already making money. I was like, wow, dude, you're phenomenal. So he goes, do you have something like to show me what you want in this? And I said, yeah. So what I did with the app, ProLook, is I said, I want all credible sources to be the filter in this, right? So I want, what's the feedback from pro scouts? What's the feedback from college coaches? What are parents saying? What are players saying, right? And then all we did was combine all those things and fix it, right? And say, can we create a forum where everybody could come together? Coaches, it's free, right? So I looked at it from their perspective because a lot of college coaches are saying, man, and I'm not talking about, the elite ones, the TCUs, the Vandy's, the Mississippi, the Georgias, whoever, who have big recruiting budgets. I'm talking about those, smaller D1s, the D2s, the D3s, the NEI, JUCOs, all of them that are just like, man, I can't pay to get to these places, but I know there's some good players or whatever it is. So we made it free for college coaches. Usually what a lot of people are doing with the app is, they're giving it to like their baseball ops guy and he runs their side of it, right? So, or the recruiting guy will be like, man. So I ran some beta tests with some college coaches that I know. I said, hey man, all I'm asking you to do is at this event, use this for this day. That's it. And then just give me your feedback. If it's terrible, tell me it's terrible, right? Or if it's this. And everybody's coming back going, I just scouted a whole day, whatever it was, 8 games. And I did not use anything but my phone, right? So they're gathering video, they're tracking players, they're writing reports within, they're doing all this. So I said, okay, check, right? College coaches, that's a win. So then I was going to parents. Parents like, we'd like more control. We don't know how to help our son in this, right? Like, do we send multiple emails? Do we do this? So then what happens is if a player signs up for a subscription, their parents get a accompanying, subscription as well for free. So now if parents are there and they've got, a radar gun up or whatever it is, they can go pocket radar or whatever. They can put that video on the screen. So now you have video verification. And then with the pro scouts, I was like, hey man, we need to get these players done right. Meaning let's use you guys as the evaluators or former college coaches as the evaluators. And now that feedback to a current college coach is not coming from somebody who they may not respect, the feedback or whatever. Hey, this guy throws 96 and he really throws 84, right? Now you have credible sources, then, connecting the dots for a college coach and stuff. So we did that. And then for the players, we were like, hey, man, we want this to be really inexpensive for you. So for the elite version, it's $10 a month, right? And you can pay up front for, $100 for the year. But I'm like, you spend, $400 on a glove, 150 on spikes. You're spending 300 plus on a bat. And all of those things, yes, contribute to your success in some way, shape, or form, but they're a tool. So I'm like, why not add a tool to your toolbox that could get you a $20, $30, $40, $50,000 scholarship over 4 years or more for $100 a year? Like, that's a no-brainer. So we tried to just take all the things that are seen as problems in the game, put them all in this format, and then allow every user interface to basically connect and do things the way that they wanted to. So now you weren't going to get 500 emails from a player that you knew you had no interest in, right? Now you could do the filtering. So, there's some, and I don't know if you want me to go into this, but there's some cool features that coaches can do in particular, right? So if you like a player, but you're not ready to recruit them yet, but you might start following them on the app, if that player, you're like, man, he's 86, 87, I want to know when he gets to 89, right? Well, as long as that player uploads the video and you're following him and it verifies the 89, it auto notifies that coach, right? So now that coach is like, whoa, I'm sitting at an event in Florida and a kid that I like in North Carolina is now, I've got new metric information on him, right? We also only allow 1 minute of video upload on the elite version per upload. Right now it's unlimited, but it's only 1 minute. But a lot of things coaches were asking me, hey, what type of young man is this? What does he look like in the weight room? So coaches can also search by, they can search by metrics, obviously Rapsodo, TrackMan info, stuff like that if they're into that side. But they can also search videos by timeline. So if a kid posted a year ago and now he posts a week ago, you can kind of watch that progression as you go. The one feedback I got from a lot of the college coaches was like, dude, this is saving us tens of thousands of dollars on our recruiting budget. And people are literally signing players out of this. So I'm like, it's a win. So it's going well. Good. But yeah, that's the long story, how it got there. But
good story. I mean, it's just part of it is implementation, is a big
part.
What it is. You've been good at that, the implementing portion of it. Because everybody's got ideas, but to actually go out and do it is phenomenal.
And little things that parents and players had said to me, we have a notification system that can segment the audience. So if I want to send, or one of the guys wants to send a notification in the app, we can do it to all, we can do it to college coach, we can do it to player, we can do it to parent. Basically what happens is parents would say, hey, I heard from this college coach and I haven't heard from him in a week and a half. And I'm like, oh, that's because it's a dead period, right? But they don't know that, right? So we'll put the calendars in there, but we'll also do an auto notification that lets them know, hey, this is what's happening, this is what's upcoming. You can save your searches, you can do all those other things. So on both sides, it's a connection point that is very inexpensive, but also very valuable. So far it's been really good. We've been very thankful.
How'd you get into public speaking?
So originally, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I thought, just my love for sports and doing those sorts of things. And so it goes back to that 9th grade teacher, that communication, they just said, hey, you're communicating these concepts really well and clearly, would you be open to doing this? So then when I got into pro ball, we'd of course do all those community service events. And we usually go to schools and those sort of things. And everybody was like, Aggie, you're talking, right? I've just never been scared of talking for the audiences. So that was how it got started. And I've just always enjoyed it. I mean, I don't know whether people want to hear from me or not, right? But if they're saying, asking a question around baseball or finance or whatever it is, and I have some potential value to add, and they ask me to come do it. I really enjoy that because I understood this from Mr. Walter. He would give us 3-hour practice and then 2 hours of talking afterwards, right? And me and another guy, maybe 2 other guys, said how impactful those talks were. Some days you were just like, please be quiet. Just please be quiet. I just want to go home. I want to eat. But my point in saying that is when I'm talking to an audience, I don't expect 500 people to be impacted by the things I'm saying, but maybe there's 5 that are, maybe there's 10 that are, and maybe that changes a trajectory for the young person. So I try to do this with my own kids, put them in front of people who can speak well, who can clearly demonstrate an expert knowledge, a mastery of a certain topic. And maybe my kids will pick up some things because they don't hear it well from mom and dad, not all the time anyways. So that's how I got into public speaking. I feel like it's a forum that benefits a lot of people if they're willing to listen and grow, which is, I think, a big thing for me. That's why
I rated some anti-drug, anti-alcohol.
Yeah, did a lot of that. I was always designated driver. People thought it was because of I have a strong faith background. People always thought that was it. And I was like, no, it's because I saw all the damage that was being done, and I thought it would inhibit my baseball career. So I've always been a person that all right, if you have a pendulum and I can get 1% positive versus 1% negative, I'm going to try and swing that 1% positive. And so that's where it was for the anti-drug, anti-alcohol. And now, obviously, we know the statistics that are out there, the things that are doing. And, I did some things that I wasn't proud of when I was younger. And I was like, man, I don't want to be that person. And so if I can help keep kids away from this stuff, then I'm going to certainly try and do that.
Do you have a fail-forward moment? Everybody's got to answer this one. Something you thought was going to sidetrack you? Getting out of scouting, is that a fail-forward moment?
That was for sure. That was for sure. I thought that was going to be I remember calling the scouting director at the time, and he was a good friend, and I just said, man, I don't know if this is the end of my career in baseball. And I may have to be okay with that if it is, but I have to make this decision for my family and for me personally. And so that was the moment where I thought it was all going to just come crashing down. And actually what I've found to the forward part is it's been better for my family. It's been better financially. It's been better just the time that I get to spend with my kids and doing things like that. But it's also, I think that's part of life. You take those risks sometimes and you don't know how it's going to play out. But I've also been able to stay around the game, do things that I think can impact the game in a positive manner. But maybe it's not winning World Series. Maybe it's just helping young people take a different path and get some opportunities to keep playing baseball for 4 more years,
What are some final thoughts, and where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you. Final thoughts is one, I think this is a phenomenal format. I really appreciate being brought on here. I mean, going through and seeing some of the different people and listening to some of the podcasts. I mean, you guys are doing a phenomenal job, and that's why we're excited about partnering with you guys, because it's just, you guys truly are pushing forward the game, right? And keeping it up and doing some phenomenal things. So I appreciate that. If people want to reach me, they can send me an email to Brandon, BRANDON at baseballprodigy.com. They can download the app. If you're a college coach, download it's free. If you're a player or parent, and that's at ProLook.app. So PROLOOK.app. And those are probably the 2 best ways to get a hold of me and stay in contact. But this is amazing. So I really am grateful for the opportunity to come and speak to you.
Yeah, maybe sometime you and JC and I will be at Point Stadium in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
At some point. Brandon, thanks for your time, man. Hopefully JC's listening. JC, you're the best, man. Brandon, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ryan.